But we're going to start with a Q&A time. Do you want to go ahead and just mention, I've got the scriptures up, and this is a good time if you have Bibles. We're actually going to pull out Bibles today.
Ooh.
Crazy, I know, it's college X class. And we read the Bible. Well, we start with prayer. We'll do that first, and then we'll jump into the Word. Lord, thank you so much for another week, and for Steve having a solution with the projector. And we, Lord, pray that we'll get to know you better, and that we will get closer to you, and please allow us opportunities to draw others closer to you in this coming week. In Jesus' name, amen. So, do you just want to go ahead, Bill, and
You want me to tell you what, like one question at a time that I have?
yeah, do the first one. So Bill emailed me just with some fun questions, and we're going to start off with those because that's what we want to do. We have a curriculum, but we also want to just make it open mic. So if anybody has something that they're wondering about, it's really bothering them, or their kids, brought home from school or whatever, we want to have that opportunity here too. So you do the Isaiah one first.
All right. So
Be sure to speak up back here.
Okay.
So we get it on.
first question has to do with Isaiah 45:7, which is referenced on page 19 of our current book. And then I go on to say that the verse is used by many non-Christians at abortion clinics to say that God created evil. And I've always considered the text to mean that God, in the sense that God will reward Israel or people for doing things pleasing to God and punishing them for not. As I understand it, the word evil is used in the Bible, but it actually would mean something like disaster or woe. Another thing I've thought about is that if God created man and man creates evil, since Adam was kicked out of
Garden.
thank you, out of the Garden of Eden. Therefore, if God did away with evil, would he have to get rid of all people? Just want to know your thoughts.
So that's the first question. And so the passage says, this is the NIV. I'll tell you what, I'll read it out of the King James, which is where they're probably quoting because it uses the word evil.
What's the reference?
Isaiah 45 and verse 7. So, I form the light and create the darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So, obviously, when you're talking to somebody at a clinic, they're probably not even aware that there are other translations of the Bible. And exactly.
Or what's before or what's after.
Yeah, context. They definitely don't want to talk about context.
It's interesting that light and darkness are sort of opposites, and then if something is supposed to be the opposite of peace, evil isn't necessarily the opposite of peace. So that
Right.
kind of strikes me as not being in harmony with the first half.
And of course, the genre is not poetic; it's prophetic. But there is a poetic angle to how prophecy is written. It's very rigid. It's like this. So there's a form to it, like you're saying. It's talking about opposites, and the author's asking you to consider things like that, even in the Hebrew. So the word is translated like I think you pointed out that it says calamity. Did you say?
Yeah.
In your verse, okay.
Yeah, in the book.
Disaster is how the NIV does it. I bring prosperity and create disaster. I, the Lord, do all things. So, number one, I think the quick answer to someone like that is, well, you're using ancient English, basically. The modern English wouldn't even say the word evil there. But if someone wanted to press the issue, because the ultimate question is, has God made evil? Is God the creator of evil? If so, then how can he be God? So, what's the answer to that? Did God create evil? He allowed. Think back to in the Garden of Eden. Let's say before Satan fell. Let's say Satan didn't fall until like 3 seconds before Adam and Eve. Hypothetical. So there was a time when there was no evil anywhere. Did God create evil?
He allowed it to happen. So in a sense, he did create it.
Yeah.
I think what you're circling around is he created
The opportunity.
exactly the possibility, the opportunity. And why?
Pride was in Lucifer's heart. It caused him
Pride, you said?
pride.
Yeah.
Pride,
So Lucifer is a little. We don't know as much about angels as we do about us. So Adam and Eve. So you said possibility is the word used.
I said opportunity.
Opportunity,
but
yes. So potential, possibility.
Yeah,
Why did God create the possibility for evil? For us to choose evil.
Can't have love without freedom.
Right.
Free will, yeah, I guess.
So he created us to have a relationship with him that was loving, which means love is by definition a choice. It's to choose to do something, to worship him in this case. To love each other is to choose the good for each other and to work, to do actions and whatnot. We love our children because, or by working in their lives so that they reach their potential, their good, their metaphysical good, or their telos, however you want to label it. Not moral good all the time. It's also just, like a sharp knife is a good knife. It's because that's what a knife is supposed to be. A good boy is, we went through this a couple weeks ago. So yeah, that's the most widespread answer to that. Not universal within Christian circles, but pretty close to universal. That some, I would say Kennedy would probably agree with that, but people who go further than Kennedy does on the God determined everything ahead of time, they would be committed to God being the author of evil, depending on how far you want to go. I talked to someone yesterday at lunch, and he was talking about, he has just a policy, he does video production, and I asked him, like, well, you're doing video for so-and-so, and you don't totally agree with him. He says, I know, but he says, I don't want to be so restrictive that I don't do any video production for anyone other than SES, basically. But then he said, but I won't do it for hyper-Calvinists. And I'm like, wow. That's interesting. He said, well, I have Calvinists as customers, but honestly, when I'm talking to him, he says, they're not really Calvinists. They haven't thought through the whole deterministic line of reasoning, like, where do you stand on that? Did God really create evil? Determinism would necessitate that, the problems that they run into on that side. The majority of Calvinists or Reformed thinkers and people are going to be like a D. James Kennedy or an R.C. Sproul, where they don't talk like that. They find ways of not explaining it away, but they have explanations to say that man is free, and they would largely agree with this, that God had to create us with the potential to choose the sin, the evil, the fruit, so that it was actually a free choice. So that would be the long-winded answer. The short-winded answer is they're probably not even, they're just throwing out a verse to try and derail you, of course. And just, sometimes it's just good to say, dude, I don't want to say this like in a mean way, but sometimes you do have to say things in this tone. But do your homework. Let's just show up here at the sidewalk and think you're going to derail 2,000 years of very, very thoughtful reflection on this because you showed up and just threw this out there on the context. Now, if you'd like, let's go over here and let's read it together and in the context and read it from a modern English version. And you can do all that, but it just depends. But that's the answer to that one. Is that satisfying?
Oh, yeah. Got it.
I think you pretty much were saying this is probably the answer, right? And yes, it is. Oh, another thing I want to say about that is, because it talks about disasters, calamities. So earthquakes would be in that. That's one way how God judges a nation or people. Hurricanes. So you have human evil, like an evil ruler causes his people to suffer, and so you can kind of blame the guy or gal. Say they're the reason. But what about an earthquake? Who did anything, it's an act of God, they call it. So what about that? That's what the verse is saying. God caused that.
Right.
God caused the earthquakes. So the other short answer, I think the satisfying answer is, I heard a talk 2 weeks ago on this from a nerdy scientist, and they were going through all the intricacies of plate tectonics and hurricanes. If there weren't hurricanes, we would be dead. Human life and most life on Earth would be impossible because hurricanes cool the surface. There's nothing on hurricanes and icebergs breaking off and floating into the ocean is the only reason we're not frying up and the oceans are all evaporated because of the raised heat. They serve a life-giving purpose. So hurricanes aren't evil because obviously having an habitable planet is a good, right? But hurricanes that kill people, yeah, that would be a natural evil. Because in the Garden of Eden, no one died from hurricanes. Same thing with earthquakes. Life is impossible without plate tectonics. You need to have a planet that is churning up the nutrients so that plants can grow and the whole cycle of life, the food chain begins. If you have just a rock like Mars, it would be desolate because it doesn't have the opportunity to churn up all of the. As there are other, I think the release of gas helps with creating the ozone layer, and there are other design benefits to plate tectonics. So again, without earthquakes, we're not even here having this conversation. People dying from earthquakes didn't happen before the fall, but earthquakes were part of God's original design. They're not a bad thing. They're not evil. So that's why it makes more sense to say disasters or calamities. That God causes something to happen that is a natural thing, but He causes it to happen in Canaan or some judge of people. He can and does do that. So that would be another layer to add to it. That again, what exactly you're talking about when you say evil? If they mean earthquakes, you go that direction. So
Gotcha.
the other two questions were really cool. Then Luke, what?
The other one is Luke 16, 19 through 31, which is the story of Lazarus and the rich man.
So these are two questions related to that.
Right.
So shoot them both out.
All right, the first one is, as you stated 2 weeks ago, you said people that go to hell are reunited with their body.
At the resurrection they are, not immediately.
Okay. All right.
'Cause I think that was one of the questions.
Right. And so I was listening to a preacher on the radio the other day, and he said, yes, you are reunited with your body, but you are not tortured forever. You will be eventually consumed by fire, and then all those people in hell will be gone.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were in class a couple of weeks, like 3 weeks ago, or 4 weeks ago, I made the statement that I was listening to a preacher up in Lake Norman one time, and he ended the sermon with, and the rich man is still there thirsting right now, 2,000 years later. Okay? So I wanted your thoughts on, do all the people in hell eventually burn up like that? Or are they going to always be tortured?
No, they won't be burned up. It is eternal.
Right.
That's definite. But the rich man doesn't even have a body right now. He's suffering. So the dead before the resurrection immediately go to the glory of the presence of God. The how do you call that? I forget the name of it. There's a formal name that. Anyway, we see God for who He is. Then the damned are immediately aware of their separation and their suffering. Not physically yet, because they don't have their bodies back. So that's the immediate answer is yes, the rich man is today still suffering.
Right.
But not in a burning of his body sense. It's suffering, it's torture, it's all the things that hell is. But the ultimate lake of fire that's in Revelation, first everyone gets their bodies back. At whatever point you think pre-mill, mid, but everyone agrees that you're reunited with your bodies. And then we get new bodies on the new earth, and we live in paradise on earth, and they are eternally suffering. So it's not a fire in the sense, obviously, of a fire if this building went on fire, because that consumes, that changes matter from one form to another, and it eventually runs out of fuel. That's not the kind of fire, because it's ongoing forever and ever. So yes, in a sense, the rich man right now is suffering, but not physically. Which doesn't help him any. It's still, it's hell. So that's not a good thing, regardless of whether your body's burning.
The guy who was asking the question to the preacher on the radio was, in a sense, asking the same question I'm asking. Okay, and so the guy on the radio said, "And nowhere in the Bible can you find that it says that the person will be in hell for infinity or
Forever and ever." It seems like there is, but I'm not as familiar with those passages to pull it off the top of my head.
See what you think of this idea. This is what I thought to me, because this bothered me. That bothered me. And what I've come to is that there's a debt to pay. The Bible's clear that there is a debt that must be paid. And we know Jesus pays that debt sufficiently. But for those who don't accept that, they go to Hades and they begin paying that debt, a debt that they will never pay for the
Because
rest.
it's an infinite God that you offended. So
You
can say
will,
that-
you
yeah.
will work forever to pay that debt, and there's some parables on that. That you'll work forever to pay that debt, and you'll never. You can work as hard as you want,
Mhm.
and you'll never pay it forever. And God's just, and that debt must be paid.
And there's a sense that people are, the interesting thing about the rich man is he didn't ask to leave hell.
Oh, no, he was given orders. He thought he was still in charge.
Well, but it's interesting. If he thought he was in charge and he wanted to leave hell, he would have said, I want to go up there into heaven where I see Lazarus having, everything he ever needed. But he just says, I want some relief is all. And there's a teaching in Christian circles that I've only heard a few times. I haven't studied this enough to know how widespread, but it made a lot of sense to me. There's something about the state of mind of the people who are in hell. They rejected God here with all that they have. And what's his answer to the rich man? They have the Bible, they have the prophets, they have general revelation, they have enough. So if you reject all that you have been given, there's sort of a self-perpetuating nature of hell, where you are eternally doing what it takes to stay there by rejecting God still, which produces pain and torture and all of
I
that.
don't think they're repentant in hell.
Doesn't sound like it.
So C.S. Lewis says the door to hell is locked from the inside.
Yeah, that's another way of putting it. He's always so good at putting things in.
Matthew 25:46. Jesus speaking. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life.
So there you
Eternal.
go. There's
There you
your
go.
statement.
And it was something. It's like I can't imagine.
I
it's not clear.
know
in the
it's
I
Bible.
think
I
I've
know
heard
it's
that
one,
guy. He's a Seventh-day Adventist, I think.
They believe in annihilationism,
Yeah.
partial
And-
annihilation.
Yeah, and I think I've heard that guy you're talking about, and he actually uses this verse, and he says, well, this is obviously proof that of annihilationism, and he says, because it says they will go away to eternal punishment, not to eternal punishing. And I'm like, man, that is the weakest, that doesn't even make sense grammatically what you're saying.
Eternal is the time marker, not the.
Yeah.
Jen, you had something.
Well, I just had a different verse too, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. It's a whole statement, but it says, inflicting vengeance on those who do not know God and those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus. They will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord and the glory of his might when he
Wow.
comes on that day to be glorified in the saints and to be marveled at among those who have believed.
Two perfect proof texts there.
Well, see, I could see how the guy who's the preacher, if you want to call him a preacher now, I could see how he could say, well, then you're suffering, and then on that day you're annihilated. But I can also see it. The way I read it is like she reads.
But that's
But-
not eternal.
Right, eternal
Yeah,
means
to be
eternal.
Eternal is forever.
Like a long time, but
Right.
not
And the
eternal.
interesting thing about the one you just read there, it sounds like on the day of judgment is when that starts,
Right.
not ends. Whereas the Seventh-day Adventists would say that that's when the annihilation, I would think they would say, is that Jesus comes and annihilates. It's also when the lake of fire passage, that's when the lake of fire is created, and Satan and all of these minions and all the people who, I guess they could say they annihilate partially through eternity. And then now the metaphysical reason why we believe this too, to exist is a good. And it's been given to every human being, life, right? God can't take away a good. That's against his nature. And so he can't annihilate, because that would be to remove something that's a good. Because it's better to exist than not to exist. You've been given existence. So he has to, not a moral good, like, it's not a moral category, it's a metaphysical. So that's the more nerdy answer to it, but I like that one too, because forever.
So is man naturally born with immortality?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, okay, it depends on what you mean by that.
It's
Adam
a-
and Eve would never have died if they hadn't sinned. But does that mean that the human body, without the knowledge of the bad fruit, the human body on its own was live forever, or did it need the fruit of the tree of life, or did God supernaturally keep people alive. I think the last one, but it's debatable. It's not very clear in the Bible what it meant that they would live forever. But yeah, to be human, human nature is to live forever in perfect communion with God. The only way to do that is by God's supernatural grace that He gave to them, to Adam and Eve, because you can't live forever in a universe that has entropy, for example, and the possibility of rocks falling on your head and all that. And so those are things we know. How do you reconcile the two of them? Some people say that the laws of physics were radically different before the fall, or the laws of physics were suspended inside the garden so they didn't have consequences like stubbing their toe or any kind of natural calamity, like it says here, that would kill you. How you explain it is not wide open, but there are lots of options. But yeah, to be human, which is why it's an evil. That's why Jesus cried at the grave of Lazarus, not because he missed him. He's the reason he died, because he waited, and he knew he was going to see him in a few minutes. He cried because he said, "This is not what you're supposed to be experiencing." Not just Lazarus, but all the weeping and the crying that was going on around him. And Jesus knew it because he's the one who created everything. So he knew this was not the plan for you guys. So there are a lot of other, but I like those because they seem the most obvious.
Okay, what do we do with John 3:16 or Romans 6:23? One to eternal life and one to perish, or one eternal life and the other death. And then this.
Were you talking about are you talking about humans now? Because obviously both those passages are talking post-fall.
Well, what I'm talking about is the word perish. And then I happened to hear a guy talking about this recently. And he said there are 180 places in the Bible where it says the wicked will be destroyed.
So just like when it says God has body parts and God is pure spirit, the one thing you don't do is count how many times. That's people do that all the time in Christian circles, but that is not. There's no principle of either Greek or Hebrew that says, well, count the number of times in this text, and that'll tell you how you're supposed to interpret it this time. It's the context, right? Not the usage in every other context. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, if you have a clear text, like we just read two of them, that says they are eternally, that's a clear text. Then you take a text like this, what would it mean that God is going to destroy the wicked? Well, obviously, it seems obvious that he's going to destroy he destroyed Hitler. He made sure that Hitler could not live forever and keep doing what he was doing. But Hitler's alive right now, suffering. So this is the principle that we use to say God does not have body parts is a hermeneutical principle that has to be spread for all these passages. Because there are a lot of passages, like we said, God seems to not know the future. God seems to be convinced to change his mind, but none of us believe that because there are other passages that say he can't. And on the how many times it's used point, there are many more passages that ascribe physical body parts to God than there are the few that say he's pure spirit. So if that were the case, and how we're supposed to referee these apparent contradictions, then we would all believe that God has physical body parts, and none of us do, obviously. So it's context. It's using good. Your philosophy serves theology, so you have to be thinking right about reality when we come to the Bible. And so we see things like, well, it says perish. Could that mean annihilationism? But then there are these other passages, and it's using this idea that God can't destroy something, bring something out of existence, because that would be against his nature. These are all really good reasons to think that people live forever, wherever they end up living. So when we come to passages like that, we say, well, perish or to destruction does seem to mean I will destroy all their wicked ways, their deeds. I will stop them from being able to do more evil, all these other ways that could make sense, and then it seems to not take anything away from the passage. Is that satisfying, or is it?
No. Well, the bottom line, it doesn't make any difference, doesn't.
Well, yeah. Some people will, I'm going to roll the dice, Pascal's wager, in reverse. and maybe there is no God, maybe Christianity is not true, and if annihilation is true, either immediate annihilation or eventual annihilation. Some people think death, it's annihilation. There's no more spirit, no more soul, and no more body. Then why not live how you want now? Just try to minimize the suffering you do to yourself. Forget everyone else. Just have as much fun as you can. Because when you die, so what? Even if everyone else went to heaven and you just got annihilated, that's not that bad of a price to pay for somebody to live a really decadent lifestyle. The Bible clearly teaches against that. Like, oh, your day's coming. The Old Testament's full of that. The rich to oppress the poor. And Jesus spoke against it.
But when I heard this explanation, they weren't talking about annihilation at death.
They're talking about eventual annihilation.
Eventual.
When they burned off their sins. Kind of
Right.
thing. Yeah, that's but you still have the problem with God taking away existence, and that goes against his nature because he gave existence, and that's a good thing. He can't remove it.
Plus the eternal punishment.
Yeah, the passages that really seem to
Here's
be
another
eternal.
one, just so that we have three.
every good thing comes in threes, right?
You probably find more, actually.
Revelation 14, verse 11, about those who worship the beast, it says, "In the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. They have no rest day and night, those who worship the beast in his image."
Could I read one more?
Yeah.
4? Can we go for 4? This is a parable though, so it's not as clear cut. But it's in Matthew 18, and it's when Jesus, he says, for this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a certain king who wished to settle his accounts with his slaves. And when he had begun to settle with them, there was brought to him one who owed 10,000 talents. But since he did not have the means to repay, his Lord commanded him to be sold along with his wife and children and all that he had, and for repayment to be made. But he didn't have the means to pay. So that's that idea of,
It's behind a lot of the parables, yeah.
that's pretty shocking.
I'm not sure about the doing to the least of these, if it references eternity. But go away from me, sounds final.
But the 10,000 talents, that's a lot. I don't know, but from what I heard, it was like more money than existed.
Yeah,
at
he
that
couldn't.
time.
He could. It's like a gajillion dollars. for
Yeah,
me as well.
it was more than the temple cost.
So anyway, annihilationism. There are some good books. The 4 Views series or 3 Views. I think they have one on. In fact, no, I know they do because I had to read it for Mel's class. Find that one, and they're short, so you can just kind of get an overview of it. They're not. Each of the contributions are limited by word count, so you're not going to get the whole case. But they reference if you want to read other, their source material or whatever. Ron Ball, I forget the name of the book. Remember that guy up in Michigan?
Rob Bell.
Bell.
Rob Bell. Love Wins, I think.
Is that the one where he actually came out with the annihilationism? I think his is partial annihilationism, right?
That could be, yeah.
Which part?
Means like it burns off eventually. God's going to light the flame because you were so bad, but eventually there's no more embers to burn, so you just go out of existence. That's the idea there.
I think the compassion side is hard. So if you're talking to an unbeliever, so there was one time early on after I became a Christian, I was talking to a coworker, and we were making some progress and going through the kind of the salvation message there with them. And he stopped and he said, "Well, I lost my brother recently, and he doesn't believe, so are you telling me he's going to be in hell forever?" And that's a hard thing. So that was holding him back. Like, why do I want what you're telling me when I have no hope to see the person that I love so much that I just lost? And that's kind of hard. So that's where you see the attraction of things like whatchamacallit, the Catholic version, purgatory, right? Because at least there's a way again for somebody. Yeah. Or nihilism, there's some compassion there because it says eventually the soul's going to rest.
But you still won't see him again.
Won't see him again, but there might be a sense of peace, right?
Along the way.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing about hell is it doesn't seem like they do see each other. It's not a place where you're aware of your.
It's not like a big party. They're hanging out.
Yeah, or even aware of what's happening in the room next door.
So that's just pure loneliness.
Right. It's very much. it's not fun, obviously, but it's also not very communal. So, yeah,
It's just hard to sound compassionate. Everything we do as Christians and talk about is such filled with love and compassion, and then there's that, and it always is just kind of hits you like a brick when you're talking to somebody.
yeah, especially when it's like, are you saying my loved one's in hell? I always just defer and say, I'm not saying anything.
I think it's always
This is
best-
the gospel,
We don't know. So we honestly don't know where that person is, and we don't know what they've.
but not
encountered.
because God wasn't clear. Because
Right.
we have no idea who your brother is,
Right.
but God's clear, and so
And even you may not be clear of your loved one and what they've encountered somewhere in
Right.
their life that they haven't talked about.
maybe a deathbed conversion. Maybe we can't say for sure. So, but the most important thing is what we want to be true is no bearing on what is actually true. So at some point, you can't say it so it's not heartless, but it doesn't matter what you think is a good setup for our eternity. Doesn't matter what I think. It's just what is, and then we should make the right response, right decision afterwards. Whether or not I like a certain doctrine or not, that's that. You don't do that with any other thing that you study. How do you feel about George Washington being the first president?
The liberal,
I think they do. I think
Well, they do now.
Teach that in
Maybe.
college now, yeah.
And maybe do a science, like, how do you feel about the atomic weight of hydrogen?
How do you feel
Yeah.
about global warming? So yeah, they're starting to see this way.
Yeah, it is getting ridiculous where we can't even have reasonable discourse with
You know,
people we
I've had
disagree.
people pose that same question to me.
Do you do something like that where you just say, I don't know?
You know, you have to basically say there's no way I can know. But it points to a reality among the lost, and that is that they value the creation more than they do the Creator.
And that even in the face of maybe ending up like what they think their sibling is experiencing, they'll still shake their fist at God.
I heard a sermon from R.C. Sproul one time. He was talking about an experience he had in seminary or college or something like that, where one of his professors was posed a similar question: how can I rejoice when I know that my mother is suffering in hell? And his professor replied, or how can I be happy or be a Christian or whatever when I know my mother's suffering in hell? And the professor said, if you, when you become a Christian and you cross over through death and you enter into the glorious realm of heaven, you will be able to look at your mother in hell and rejoice that she's there. Because your eyes will have been so enlightened, and you will have your affections fixed properly on God, that it will be right for you to worship God because of that.
I've heard that, George.
Justice.
Justice is satisfied. I've heard also that
And
God won't let us
R.C.
know.
He said when he said that, there was a collective gasp in the room. He said, but I just laughed out loud.
I guess what RC was doing is what, to answer what you're saying, sometimes just be brutally honest. Like, yes, it means that. I mean, think of all kinds of situations where if the Titanic's going down, you tell me that, my dad that I left behind, that mom and I are going down here, that you're telling me he's going to die? Most likely, yeah. It doesn't change anything that you don't like it.
I think maybe you could say something like, well, since we really don't know what went through the person's mind at the very last moment of their life, we don't know if they are saved or not. But if you aren't saved, then there's no chance you'll ever see him again.
And that's what Jesus basically says to people. Unless you repent,
Yeah, but I mean, if you want to see him again, this is your only chance.
Say, maybe your brother got saved at the last second. Don't you want to see him? Turn it around that way. These are all tactics we're talking here. Not, I mean, the theology is straight. We know what the theology is. That you know, there's only two places to end up. There are only two places to end up.
But as,
So,
as people, we're not just, and so if I did something wrong to you, you could easily say, "Oh, Mark, I forgive you." But you know, and then we could go on, even though wrong was done. But God's not like that.
and the wrong that's been done against God is infinite, is eternal. So the only right punishment is eternal and infinite.
So when we get to heaven, we'll be able to see like that.
Mhm.
Right now, I can't see.
But we don't have our complete sanctification.
I can't see.
Yep.
But when I get to heaven, I will.
So, and one other thing to point out about the rich man and Lazarus, because you mentioned in the third question, in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, it seems like he's actually recounting a real man named Lazarus and a real person, because none of his other parables does he name anybody. None of the characters have a name. Lazarus was named. That's it's unique. It's the only time. And the other thing is, oftentimes the narrative would be, and then Jesus told them these parables. And the kingdom of heaven is like, and he would use similes and metaphors. He just tells a story.
But the name Lazarus, if you look in the Greek or Hebrew, it has a meaning which means lifted by God or helped by God, something like that.
Yeah, there are names like that could have been ascribed to the prodigal son, or you know, they have similar type meanings, and he didn't. So I mean, it's not something that is 100% agreed upon, but I think those are good reasons. This is different. This story he's recounting here just feels different than all the parables that.
Because all Jewish names pretty much have a meaning, have a definition.
You're right in that.
So,
Yeah, they're almost all.
So it's again nothing that none of our theology changes on whether or not this was a parable or a historical account, which Jesus can see in hell and heaven. He knows what this conversation was. So we can speculate. Nothing's on the line, but it does seem like he's actually saying this is going on either right now or it had gone on or whatever. But Jesus was making a strong point. They have what they need. No excuses. So my listeners here, you guys have what you need. There are no excuses. You can't ask for a drop of water down there, or any way out either. So,
Question that's related to attributes.
Good
So when it says that Jesus sits at the right hand of God the Father, now I'm going to say in heaven, right? I'm going to try to get all this right. But God is spirit, so when you're in heaven, do you see God the Father sitting on the throne? So who is Jesus sitting next to if it's invisible? Is it an empty throne?
right, because we would say Jesus does have a body even in heaven, right? Because he is human right now. I would say no, God doesn't have a body, and there isn't a physical throne for God to sit on. God manifests even in the Old Testament physical forms, but it's not the so.
So it's more of an expression of delegated power.
Right. Because what did that mean? Now, it doesn't mean that John didn't see Jesus on the right hand of the Father as the vision. But, throughout Revelation, he says, what does this mean? So he's looking for interpretation. So it's not like photons of light from the throne are reaching his retina and no problem, I know what that means. He's still like, what? Explain this to me. I don't, similar to what Isaiah went through. So there's definitely something different. That's why they call it apocalyptic literature. It's just the way it's written is completely different than the epistles or the historical narratives. Definitely cueing you on that you need to use other interpretive principles.
So we will be in the presence of God, but what that means we can't conceptualize right now.
We know what it doesn't mean. We don't mean that we're hanging out physically with him. We're physical. So what does it mean? God's still omnipresent. He doesn't lose any of his attributes that are metaphysical attributes. So in eternity, he's omnipresent. In the new creation, he's still everywhere in all of that creation. By the way, I'm not sure what I think about, does God wipe out everything and build again in the new creation? That's a horrible thought to many theologians, because that would be God destroying something good. But it doesn't matter what you think about, whether it's brand new or just a revamping of the current creation. It's still physical. The description is physical.
Jesus still had his holes.
The what? Yeah, in his body. The one out there, as people would say, that's his resurrection body in this creation, and that's how resurrection bodies in this creation would interact, eat fish, have scars. I've heard people say that, but I don't. It seems like it's going to be a redeemed creation, not a recreated world. That's what it seems like to me, but I'm not actually sure what the Baptist position is in that one. So does anybody know?
I don't know, because New Jerusalem sounds. I mean, I did. You appreciate it. I did the measurement of it one time, and then drew it on a map of the world. It's like this big block on the side of the world.
Yeah, I've seen artists rendering, and yeah, I've heard people say that everybody who would probably be in heaven, it wouldn't be crowded. Everybody would have a condo the size of like the state of Massachusetts or something.
But it would certainly make the earth lopsided. It wobble
Let's
as
put
it's
it right.
fun.
And there's never darkness, so the light, instead of from the sun, it says it's coming from the glory of God. So it does look like the laws of physics are not what they
That's
are.
from his beard.
It's from his finger.
That's what
That
it
same
says.
finger.
It says the light comes from his beard. So that means the guy has a real beard, right?
That's why I'm trying to be godly, right?
Which means that we in turn should have beards.
That's why women aren't as good as men.
So Eric, so when it talks about the new earth as well, so post resurrection, when all is said and done, are people traveling? I'm thinking Jehovah's Witness style here, where they've got 144,000 to go to heaven, right? And you got everybody else that gets to live on earth next to the Lamb and the Lion. So what is it we believe?
Now that's a good question, because that lion and that's not lion and the lamb, but the predator and the prey, is that talking about the millennial kingdom? Is that talking about the new earth? It's unclear, because in that same passage, humans die. The two Isaiah passages that mention the lion and the lamb. So it doesn't seem to be talking about the new earth. So that just a little side.
People die in the millennium.
Right. And that's why at best it's about the millennial kingdom, it seems. So that's just an aside there. But there's a book, Randy Alcorn, called Heaven. And he kind of just conjectures on all these types of things. And he says, what if we can travel wherever we want in the universe? You got time, and you're still with God. It's not like you don't have the presence of God, on Venus or another star system or whatever. So he said, I don't know of any reason why you couldn't. So maybe we can.
So you got this sort of spirit kind of presence there with God in heaven, and then you've got sort of his creation, physical creation, the mountain ranges, all that still.
Well, it calls it the heaven and earth. So it
Right.
seems to be compressed into one creation
Oh,
in
really?
our eternal state.
Okay.
Because it talks about, that's the imagery of the city coming down, and it says he will be with his people, he will be their God, they will be his people. I think it's the phrase, or something like, okay, that division between his the spirit realm and the physical realm is gone. It's the human experience now, and it's even different than the Garden of Eden. So it's not a return to Eden.
So then, when we talk about the new earth, we're talking about a joint heaven and
Right.
earth
The most accurate way to say it is the new heaven and earth. New heavens and earth.
as one
One
thing,
thing.
not the new heavens and the new
Right.
earth. And so angels are living
Seems like it.
amongst.
And there's that passage that says we'll be the judges of the angels. I'm not sure. Some people talk about that being like, you did a good job protecting me, or you did, I don't know if that's what it means exactly, or
Takes his treat.
yeah, good angel. Who's my angel? Right? I don't know about, will we be hanging out with angels? They're not physical. They still won't be physical. We will. So how we interact with angels, maybe because we're
But they're not
interacting with
physical
God.
if they have wings.
They're not incorporeal beings. So the wings are similar to it's saying that God had his throne. It'd be like, in fact, most of the references to wings are talking about the throne room of heaven. So it would be more of a vision, because they're not physical, like God's not. And they take on physical form when God lets them or instructs them to usher Lot out of Sodom and Gomorrah and times like that. But they're not physical creatures. They're pure spirit. messengers.
The cherubim
and
and seraphim.
They're pure
Yeah,
spirit.
there are certain types of angels that seem to indicate, unless that's again all just.
It seems there are always some passages that are those same passages. It says it's like this, or it means, or what does this mean? So it's not a straight.
Do they cover their face, or do they?
Yeah, and there are good reasons for that. You know why your speech is holy. Your can't look on
We got a lot of
God.
Christmas ornaments we're gonna have to throw out there.
Hallmark's out of business.
Yeah.
You know, all the little cards. What's that? Those little figurines. Not little people. Precious moments. Yeah, they're gone.
Elf on the shelf.
Yeah, yeah, elf on the shelf. So,
Elves are different than angels. They're physical,
They're real too.
yeah, they're real.
like gnomes.
So, some of the things, I mean, when you think about, they burst our bubbles. Mostly, though, it's at that level of Hallmark cards and precious moments. Like our theology doesn't depend on angels having actual physical wings, or it's just things we haven't looked at real carefully. And I also will say, since nothing's really riding on it, as far as core doctrines, study it if you care about it, and you could come to a different understanding, and it's not going to separate you from fellowship. Now, if you become old earth, you have to leave, but you can't believe. You can believe angels. Sorry. Which actually is a good thing for this segue here, because I prepared this: the 3 E's that you're never supposed to bring up if you want harmony and unity. And this is actually what preachers say. Like I've heard preachers say, "I will not speak on the 3 E's." Someone asked me to come in because that does nothing but divide. And this would be kind of a like those. People don't divide over angels, but the earth, how old is it? Eschatology, what's the end times? I mean, people split into denominations over those things, right? And then the election, obviously, is a pretty big one to split on. So those are the 3 E's. And in this class, we tackle all 3 of them because we love it. But I thought I'd put that out there. Did anybody look at that video that Pablo posted? Al, you probably did, right?
I can't remember.
Pablo's video? Okay, I'm going to play it. The guy, let's do this. Although I think, since I'm not HDMI, listen really carefully. I want to play the first 10
Oh,
seconds.
yeah.
Conforms to reality.
Okay. You go.
Truth. Some people define it as that which conforms to reality. But whose reality, yours or mine? Let's define it as that which conforms to the mind of God. When God speaks, it is correct, it is true. Because there's only one reality that really matters, and that is the reality of God.
It gets worse. But, okay, I shouldn't say that. I want to load the question. What do you think of that? There's only one reality that matters.
Sounds like a trick question.
Yeah.
How's he know he got the right one?
You kind of framed it.
Well, amongst all the realities that are out there, this one's better than that one. I'm going to go with this one.
It's only one.
That's pretty pretentious.
It's a first of all, it's a false way to describe. Some people describe reality as that which corresponds to reality. The truth is that which corresponds to reality. But whose reality? Well, that's the same. That's the line of reasoning that Descartes entered in, and Kant and Hume, and the postmodernists are the great-great-grandchildren of it. It's true for you, but not for me. How many realities do you think there are? Like, I want to ask him. There's one reality that we live in. God is existence. We have existence. We're in reality. The goal of anybody's life is to understand reality for what it is, not pick one. Well, God's is better, so I guess I'll go with him because he's a really good God. Now we're talking about amongst all the things that are true with little t, go with the one that's a big T. It's pluralism, multiculturalism, postmodernism, dressed in Christianese. And so he goes on just basically that same point over and over, is that we're going with God's reality because he's the biggest guy in the playground. He's the one that's going to beat up all the other realities. Is the tone that he strikes. You can see what's wrong with that as we share our faith. Like, oh, you have a Buddhist reality? Oh, let me try out my reality. And I think after trying it, you're going to agree that it's better. It's 10% fewer calories. You know, so you should. And it doesn't rot your teeth and all these benefits.
Presuppositionalist in a way.
It's totally presup. This is from a ministry that is pretty presup. They don't know it, but.
They don't know who they are, but they are.
Well, put it this way, their founder does conferences with another ministry that is presup by definition, or by admission. And they were invited to our conference in recent years and asked to talk about it, and they wouldn't. So I won't say who, but they do events with that other ministry, and so they do believe that. So he talked about like everything has to be filtered through the Bible, everything. The same stuff that we've talked about. When the Bible itself says don't do that, the Bible itself says you know God through creation, through what is made, then it's hard to say that you have to start with the Bible to know knowledge, to know anything. God says you know reality because of how I made you and how I made things, and that's enough for you to know me. You reject me, that's why I judge you, or you respond to that revelation, that's why I give you opportunity to hear the gospel. So, do you see what's kind of on the line with that? Number one, it does sound pretty like, oh, I'm with him, man. Yeah, I'm with God's reality. I don't want to be on the other team. You know, God's the king captain over here. I do not want to be on the other team. You can see why that is on the surface, but when you step back and you say, well, what do you mean? How many realities are there? Do you see the danger of it?
And he doesn't mean the people's perceptions, right? He truly means there are multiple.
Yeah, if you want, I can play the whole thing. It's 4 minutes long, but he goes on and on. It just doubles down to that point.
Can't people create their own reality? I mean, I know people
fantasies
who make it happen. They have the resources and they can
manifest destiny.
But that's not reality.
So
that's what that is.
It's their delusion, or
they had. If you're talking about like sort of like the Lord of Vincent Peale,
well,
believe it, you'll achieve it.
No, just somebody who has wealth and they can buy whatever reality they want. If they want to be loved, they buy people.
Well,
can't be loved though.
Yeah, and
okay, I see what you're saying.
They can buy things that.
He's a rich guy, Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
Warren Buffett, you know, I mean that dude's so rich, and when he gave away $1 billion to charity, he said there are lots of ways to heaven, but this is the funnest. He didn't make that a reality. He's still going straight to hell. True. He's paid for more abortions than any person in the history of the world.
So what you've got is they're not making their own reality. They're able to accomplish a lot more potentialities that exist for all of us. You have the potentiality to do the same thing that guy that Warren Buffett did. But it's not actualized. So he's not creating a new reality. He's just made more money, oppressed more people, bought more attention, whatever. However you want to say it, but it's not a different reality. Reality is the term, it's the highest level that you can use to describe anything. So it just means that which is. So if it isn't, that's not part of reality. Unicorns are not part of reality except as objects of the imagination. They're not part of material reality. So you see it's that which is. And that's why it's so profound when God said, you live in reality, you have reality, I am reality, I am existence, I am. It's just, that's when the lid gets blown off our roof and we start just thinking about how awesome God is. So, okay. So the 3 E's, I want to put that in there, I can't remember why. Oh, I think we were going to talk about these things. And, there are things that we don't, places we won't go. So, any questions on that? I was going to play, I might if there's time. There's this group called Lutheran Satire. Have you heard of them? They're the ones that have that. I played that video when we did the Trinity last year. I'll do it this year again. Where the two simple, St. Patrick was trying to explain the Trinity. He was using all these bad analogies. And they're like, oh, Patrick, that's partialism. That's finite Godism or whatever. And so it's just a fun way to teach the theology. He has one where they got Clint Eastwood reading the lyrics to modern worship songs. So he's sitting here, I'll play him for you, but it's.
Is it really Clint Eastwood?
No. It's
I gotta hear that.
okay, I'll play it. It's funny because, and I want to be, because there are songs that I'm watching. I'm going, it's kind of cool. I like that tune. Let's see, where would I find it where I can get it quickly? This is not my iPad, so I
Just this had to do that.
Now, the one thing I will say about these guys, Lutheran Satire, I think they're like really onto something, and they're hilarious. And satire is a great genre to teach things, but then they go too far and they start like getting bullyish, I think, and they get a little bit. I think if you've made your point through humor, just laugh it out to the end, and we'll get it. You don't have to be. So I will say that I don't like their tone throughout the whole thing, but yeah, this is.
Okay, where do you want me to stand? Right in front of the mic is good. And you guys just want me to read some hymns? Oh, these are better than hymns. Way more inspiring and relevant. Oh, I feel like dancing. It's foolishness, I know, but when the world has seen the light, they will dance with joy like we're dancing now. Yeah. This is a religious song? Yeah. About God. Yes. The Bible God. That's the one. Ugh. In the secret, in the quiet hour, I wait only for you, 'cause I want to know you more. I want to touch you. I want to see your face. So you're telling me that people sing this stuff in church? Yeah, men sing this in church. Well, usually just the guy in the praise band sings it. Everyone else just puts their hands up in the air and sways to the soothing soft rock rhythm like they're at a Phil Collins show in 1986. Well, that sounds about right. Freedom, 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 freedom. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours and you are mine. You sure I got the right words here? Because this doesn't much sound like church music to me. What does it sound like? Like what would happen if my 6-year-old granddaughter married a Care Bear and they wrote their own wedding vows. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes. It's worse than the script for Pink Cadillac. All right, next song. What's the matter, Clint? Well, I guess I'm just a bit confused. This Christian music doesn't really talk about grace or forgiveness in any meaningful way. In fact, a lot of it doesn't even mention Christ by name. Right, so what's the problem? Well, since Paul says in Colossians 3:16 that the purpose of sacred music is to teach people who Jesus is and what he's done for us, you'd think that people who write sacred music today might at least want to name drop the Son of God into one of their little ditties. Yeah, you'd think that, but no. I will call upon your name.
One more thing.
If I call upon your name, I may never actually say your name in this song. I'm gonna sing the theme from Back to the Future because it's pretty much the same chord progression. Dude, why are you making fun of all our songs? Well, maybe it's because I don't much care for it when Christians toss their greatest musical treasures in the garbage in order to sing a bunch of Josh Groban knockoff, barely religious cheeseball ballads for soccer moms. What, you know something better? Well, how about this? Now I will cling forever to Christ my Savior true. My Lord will leave me in never, whatever he passes through. He rends death's iron chain. He breaks through sin and pain. He shatters hell's dark thrall. I follow him through all. Dude, that was awesome. Can we record that with the band? Are they any good? Oh, we've got the best praise band in the state. These guys can play anything. All right, let them know the song has 3 sharps and 7 chords. Yeah, okay, well, never mind then, Mozart.
Everybody blames the Lutherans. Okay. Okay. I do want that brought up because we're studying the attributes of God, so it is relevant to what we're talking about. I like some of the songs that they mentioned in there. I don't think they're all things to throw away, but like we've said before, basically if you can sing a song and it sounds like your 6-year-old granddaughter wrote it, with her Care Bear at the wedding vows, and it doesn't go past that, maybe there's more that's needed in the song is all that you take away from that. But it's funny, isn't it? Like, yeah. So we got to, we talked a lot about divine personalism and the danger of talking about God and his attributes as though they're the exact same thing as our attributes, but they're just bigger. You know, even if you mean infinitely bigger, we don't mean that. That's what Lutheran satire was making fun of. That's the Clint Eastwood songs there. It's just God, an infinite romantic interest is basically it. So we're going to finish off the attributes this week in less than 30 minutes, a piece of cake, and then we're going to do next week the Trinity. And then before we begin, any questions on passing attributes? Seems like it's been going pretty easy. Easy as pie, right? Or easy as mud. Clear as mud, that's the end. So infinity. God is literally limitless in his being. He's without boundaries. A being beyond the limits of the created universe. It is only because of the finite nature of our concepts that this positive attribute must be expressed in negative terms. So we know what finite means, because that's us. That's everything we experience. Just take that and remove the limit. Can we envision what that means? No. But we do know what finite means, and we can just say, Lord, we affirm that you're not that. That's what the negative attributes of God, infinite, immaterial would be another example. We know what material means, so he's not that. So infinite, tons and tons of passages that support this, obviously. But 1 Kings, will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. It kind of goes to what we were talking about. Is God on the throne? Or, no. Job, God, can you probe the limits of the Almighty? They are higher than the heavens. What can you do? They are deep as the depths of the grave. What can you know? Their measure is longer than the earth and wider than the sea. Of course, it doesn't mean just longer than the earth and just longer than the sea. It's infinite. Job's a really good book for this.
What's the reference in Job?
Job 11:7-9. Pretty much every passage that goes after that, especially when God answers Job. That's when he gets unlimited.
I slow it down enough. Good, but what if somebody brings up like the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle?
In the tabernacle.
Yeah.
Well, it's God's presence, not God.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure it's just a manifestation of God.
Right.
What is the best way to explain that to somebody who's arguing from that position?
I would just ask them, so you think that God was only in that tent, and he was unaware of what was going on in the courtyard? Like, or he didn't know what was happening on the other side of earth at the time? Or no one would think that. So obviously and I think even some of the descriptions say, that it is a manifestation. I don't use that word in the Old Testament, but because it would say that it moves at times. That's when they do the pickup camp and follow it.
Mm-hmm.
God wasn't strolling. He was like an Alzheimer's patient that just kind of wandered around for 40 years until they accidentally found where they were going. Doesn't mean that, of course. So, yeah, a lot of times, there aren't proof texts like, oh, that's a slam dunk. There are some, like, I am. I think it's a proof text that God is pure being. But a lot of times you just read everything and you say, wow, this seems pretty clear. God's omnipresent. He's infinite in his attributes. Now, infinite doesn't mean he is everything. Is God infinitely evil? Is he infinitely material? No, he's infinite in what he does have. Say this, I don't say it the wrong way. Right. Whatever we can say about God is infinite. So that's important. Like we say, God's limited. He can't lie. He can't. The kids teach on Sunday, they are just rocking. They're at the point now where if we're at a lesson that has to do with these type of attributes, I'll start off with, all right, name me some things that God can't do. He's not able to do. Now they're like, well, he can't lie. He can't stop loving me. He can't make it that there's a square circle. They just spout these things off, and then we're like, isn't that awesome? Like, God can't lie to you ever. So everything that's in here, it's not impossible that it's a lie. So if there's something that seems like we don't understand how it can be this and this, the problem's on our side of the interpretation, not in what he said. So I think it's a really cool thing to meditate on what God's not sometimes too. Ignatius, there's no one superior to God or even like to him among all the beings that exist. So God exists. So he's trying to contrast finite godism, which is the culture he was in, Greco-Roman. So he had Zeus and these other entities that are gods, but they're finite. He only had, control over their arena, thunder, sea, whatever. Ignatius is talking directly into that. He's saying that's not that. Even if there are gods like that, there's still a God that is above everything. Aquinas, fast forward 900,000 years, the fact that the being of God is self-subsisting, not received in any other, and is thus called infinite, shows him to be distinguished from all other beings, and all other beings are to be apart from him. Why is it shown to be distinctive? Because of whether you're receiving your existence or you are existence. In this case, shows him to be distinguished from all other beings because he doesn't receive anything, any attribute. We receive everything, including our very existence. Gets back to the I am and the pure actuality. Now, just to be very unifying, John Calvin agreed with this. Luther agreed with this. These are one of those things that you shouldn't disagree with this if you're a Christian in any sense of the word. These are the safe ones. These are not part of the 3 E's. I showed that up front. The nature of God himself is infinite, invisible, eternal, almighty. Whence it follows that there are mistaken who ascribe to God a visible form. We were talking about, even in the throne, it's like, it's not a form of God, it's a vision. It means something other than material. In his one essence, there are 3 persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which we'll get into next week. How can there be only one God in 3? Talking about 3 people, aren't we? And Jacob Arminius. Remember, Calvin and Arminius are saying the same thing. Case closed, right? Hence it follows that this essence is simple and infinite. From this, that is eternal, it is eternal and immeasurable. And lastly, that is unchangeable, it's immutable. Impassible, that's a big one we didn't talk about. What does that mean? We didn't do it this year.
Unable to suffer.
Mm-hmm. Or unable to have emotions, or at the very least, if he has emotions, they're not affected by other, like our actions don't make him sad. Even if you can say that he is sad in any sense, he's not suffering in his sadness.
We don't cause suffering upon
Right.
him.
Because that would make us to cause him the effect. And so,
And he would change.
and we didn't do that this year because we did that for
When we talked about that last year, I remember the subject came up, how I said, you don't want to teach your kids that when you sin, you're grieving God or you are causing him to be sad, right? So it creates that sort of guilt, like, I just impacted the Almighty God with my sin. Just no.
Right.
Right.
And we're so used to saying things like that because if we sin against each other, it hurts. So we want to say the same thing. Right. We don't want to teach false things about God just so that our kids behave. It is, I'll admit, impassibility was a tough one when
We
I
do
first
other
learned
things
it.
to scare him into behaving, just not that one.
Yeah, I have other things. God literally has a thumb, and it's right over your head at all times. You can't see it, but he's ready. And he's watching with his physical eye. What's that triangle? The
Illuminati.
Illuminati, yeah. That's God. He's watching. And he does it through all of his secret societies. He has all of them. So, so that's important to show that here we are, Jacob Arminius, and by the way, Luther and Calvin and the church fathers all taught that God was impassible. This is something that is new for us to be taken aback when we say God doesn't either have emotions or his emotions aren't affected by our actions. We don't grieve God in a literal sense. So he's impassible and incorruptible in the manner in which it has been proved by us in our public D's on this subject. Man, they talked differently back then, didn't they? Any questions on infinity or on impassibility since we brought it up? It's in the book. It doesn't go on too long on that. Did that cause anybody, if it was your first time hearing about impassibility, did it cause anybody sort of a, God doesn't have emotions? Or does it make sense? Like, you accepted
Well, I
it pretty.
think a lot of people confuse, I think we talked about this last year, is a lot of people confuse all the references to God as love being a human emotion.
Yep.
And I think what we discovered was that love was a commitment to the good of somebody as opposed to the emotion.
Right. Love is not an emotion, is the quick answer to that. Love is a decision, it's in the will. And God does have a divine will. And so that's how it can be. And he wills what? What is the good, the ultimate good? Him. So when he commands worship, that's a loving act for him to command us to worship him.
When we talk about God as a jealous God, it's not like he suddenly goes into a jealous rage and then 5 minutes later he's kind of, I'm over it, right? That
Right.
kind of thing.
Except they're kicking, galaxies left and right. I can't stand it. That's when stars explode. God having a temper tantrum. A long time ago.
We were doing in our I'm trying to remember it before I forget it. So in our Bible study on Sunday mornings, it was talking about idolatry, and it was an interesting sentence that I read. It said when God was angered at people for committing idolatry, it wasn't necessarily. So I don't want to say it theologically incorrect, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But the gist of it was
Told you, man, said it
that
wrong.
it wasn't out of jealousy, it was out of because he wanted our best, and he knew that by us worshiping things that could never produce, that it led us to place our faith in things that could never satisfy and I guess would be like dead ends, so to speak. I don't know the
So
right
when
wording.
people seek something in the created order that can only be found in him, so if we are jealous of somebody, it's because we see them getting something in the created order that we could get too. So it's kind of like we want that. God's saying, I'm jealous in the sense that I want that to be directed toward me for your sake.
Right,
for
and
our sake.
that was really interesting to me when I read that, because I was always like, well, of course he's deserving, so he should be jealous. Like, wait, I'm the one who did it all. Like, and I always thought it's a little self-serving, but okay, you're God, so you deserve to be self-serving if you want. But when I read that, it was so interesting because it was always just directed back for our benefit rather than for his, like, being self-serving. It was for him to protect us so that we would place our faith in the only one who could.
Worship then.
Yeah.
Does God get anything out of our worship?
He lacks nothing, so the answer has to be no.
Right.
But he doesn't need it.
It's for our benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So this very thing that the new atheists point to as, man, your God is egotistical, constantly wanting you to compliment him. They'll say things like that. Dan Barker did when he was debating Richard Howe a couple years ago. That's the kind of stuff they say. No, he doesn't need anything. So who's it for? It's for us. And we all know that. And although, those times that we have just a great worship experience, how beneficial it is, like, Lord, wow, this is now, I want this for eternity. This is great. It's for us, not for him. He doesn't gain a single thing. And it should make you, when we think correctly about God, we'll put it this way, if you're thinking something about God's attributes, and it causes you to want to pray less, worship less, love others less, then you're misunderstanding something. You just go back to it and say, what am I missing here? Because when we see God analogically for who he is, it produces, virtues in us, love for our fellow man, more desire for more of God. I want more of you. Can't get more of him in a quantitative sense. I want to align myself with you unchanging being, is what we really mean. But see, the attributes of God, I'm sorry I'm wiggling so much today. I have a really bad back day, so I'm kind of like doing this a lot more. So, that uncomfortable with you guys.
Just remember you're on camera this time.
Yeah, that's right. He's on camera. I'm all like, man, what's his problem? Omnisapience. Not Homo sapiens. Omnisapience. God is all wise. He's infinite in wisdom. Okay, so the omnisapience of God is his unerring ability to choose the best means to the best end. We brought up an issue last week If God knows everything and has all power and he's all love, why wouldn't he prevent all bad things from happening? We just read that in Isaiah where he actually causes bad things, or quote, bad things sometimes. Why wouldn't an all-loving God, with the ability to execute anything, even within, if you want to constrain it within his being, he can do anything that's according to his being. This is actually, this attribute of God answers that largely. So this attribute, since he's omniscient, omnibenevolent, so he's all good, say he knew all things, he was all good, and he is omnipotent, but he didn't have the wisdom to kind of know how to take those attributes and bring about the best. So the wisdom is what kind of, you've heard people be book smart, but they're not street smart. I guess this would be like God's street smartness. So as omniscient, he knows, the end from the beginning. He knows the means that are the most effective to achieve the best ends. And his all goodness, his omnibenevolence, assures that he wants the best ends. And his power, his omnipotence, means that he's able to do it. So you see all these work together. But omnisapience is rooted in the fact that it's wiser to choose, I'd rather have you have a good end than a good now, if the now is going to produce a worse end. So wisdom says, this is the best course of action. Does that make any sense? It's all simplicity starts really coming out when you're like, man, am I talking about omniscience right now, or omnisapience?
It'd be so much better if we could think like that.
What? Yeah.
It would be so much better off
if we could separate them, or in our thinking.
Yeah, if we could, the end versus now. I mean, Paul did. I mean, obviously.
So it's cool. Like you see one act of God, and all these attributes are manifested in it. Acting, so he's got omnipotence. He chose a good action, so he's because he saw the future. That's omniscience. He made the best decision. That's omnisapience. He did it for our good. That's omnibenevolence. In one single act of God in creation, you can see all these attributes, not parts, attributes wrapped up. So, life and mortality. Living God is said to be the source of all other life. Since we're almost done, I won't read each passage, but if you read, especially the Old Testament, it's all over the place, right? God is the God of the living, not of the dead, those types of passages. His pure actuality, this follows because he is pure actuality and he's uncaused. He's the unmoved mover. He's not the unmoving mover. He is immovable himself, but he's not immobile, metaphorically sitting on his hands that he doesn't have. But, so you see the difference between, we can't move him, we can't change him, but he's extremely active in creation. There's nothing about his unmovable nature that means he doesn't move. He's incredibly moved. All motion and activity actually begin with him as the prime mover. It's pure actuality, and life is a form of being or actuality. So God, being pure act, is life eternal. There cannot be an infinite regress of things that are receiving life. This is kind of like the argument from being or existence. We receive life from something that comes before us. You can't do that on, even in concept forever in the past. There has to be something that is life in order to bring life. It's very similar to the existence. Omnibenevolence, it's all goodness. He's unlimited in his goodness. So I bring this in here because what are the implications then? If God is all good, what about universalism or irresistible grace? So it's debated by Orthodox theologians whether goodness and love are the same thing actually, or whether they're different. And if they're different, whether love is an attribute of God or an activity of God. Some people think that God isn't love in the sense that that's an attribute of his. It's how he acts with his creation can be said God is love. I would say no, Father, Son, Holy Spirit love each other in the perfect unity of the Trinity Godhead. But that is debated about what it means to say God is love. Some hold that goodness is an attribute of God and that love is an act of his goodness. So if you want to say something about God, you can say goodness or omnibenevolence. But when he does things out of his goodness, we call that love. John 14:6 that says God is love, and that's where it seems hard to say that he just does loving acts, but it sounds like he's talking about his essence. Especially John. John was very aware of these categories, being thoroughly Greek at the time he wrote that. Okay, irresistible grace. So let's see what you guys think. Is there anyone else in here that would self-identify as a Calvinist or Reformed?
You gotta throw a rock at him.
Because I always look at you three, and I don't want to leave anyone out. So, you have a
more
Pentecostal
Calvinist than I
background,
am.
right? So,
I'm more Calvinist than I am Arminian.
yeah, I think Arminius was more wrong
Yeah.
than Calvin. I
Yeah.
don't-
Well,
and Arminius is not the answer to Calvinism.
Right.
He gave an answer; it was just really bad. So yeah, that's a misnomer that you're either Arminian
Yeah.
or Calvinist. So I just want to make sure I'm not leaving anybody out as we say this, because here we go. Irresistible grace is the I in tulip, right? All Calvinists believe in some form of that. Strong Calvinists, which I don't think any of you are from conversations, I know that R.C. Sproul was not, and I know that D. James Kennedy was not. But we'll call them strong Calvinists. We believe that grace is irresistible on the unwilling. So they're no, tough. It's irresistible. You can't resist me. Moderate Calvinists believe it is irresistible on the willing. But in view of God's omnibenevolence, it follows that grace cannot be irresistible on the unwilling. For a God of complete love cannot force anyone to act against their will. Forced love is intrinsically impossible, like a square circle. We say God can't lie, so we're not saying anything that is violating His majesty. Same way we're not saying anything against His majesty to say He can't create a square circle or a married bachelor. It's just a logical impossibility, intrinsically impossible. A loving God can work persuasively, but not coercively. So before we get to universalism, what do you guys think of that? You can throw rocks at me now.
I think it's a juxtaposition to say forced love and, trying to put forced love and irresistible grace together. I don't think those two are the same.
So do you think one of those two definitions, the strong and the moderate, are one of those two how you would describe it? Like the moderate, it's irresistible on the willing. So there's a will involved on the part of the person, and on that person, there's an irresistibility of God because He's presented Himself, truthfulness of the gospel, to somebody who would respond. There's a willingness there. That willingness doesn't save them. It's only God's, in the Calvinist model, it's God coming to them that saves them.
I would say that when you talk of irresistible grace, you're not saying that God's grace can't be resisted. That's the only reason the lost are lost, is because they're resisting the grace of God. But then it just simply means that God will only permit you to resist until He's ready to overcome it. And then He overcomes it by exerting the power of regeneration and changing your heart. And you stop resisting.
After
Yeah,
change of
because-
heart.
Yeah, but there's still a point in time where it's, okay, you don't want to call it forced love, but forced grace.
It's not forced upon the unwilling.
Well, to make
It's
somebody
the
that's unwilling,
all of a
willing
sudden
is the.
becoming willing.
I know,
But it's after. The willingness is the effect.
That's
That's the
forces.
I mean, it's logically after, even if it's simultaneous. It's a logical consequence, not the cause. So the willingness is because of the forced grace.
Well, I think the
It's the
greatest
regeneration.
example that I can think of is, Saul to Paul conversion. So I think he was,
Resisting to that
You don't
point.
think he?
Yeah.
So you don't think
he
he had a choice
certainly
anymore.
wasn't like willing to be like, hey, I'm willing to hear your side. So he was resistant until encountered. So Christ came to him, the Lord came to him. The Lord approached him, pursued him. All
Could
of
Paul
that.
have said no, though?
I don't know.
That's,
I don't know that transaction that happened. There's a little bit of gray, right, in there of what's in the story.
Right.
So
What can you actually get
did he
from
say
the
no,
story?
and he said yes, and he said no, and he said yes, and then he's like, okay, you win.
Even Paul said though at one
Do
point
you
that.
think? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Do you think that's kind of like a vision, like the Muslims now? There's a big rise of the Muslims having visions over in the Middle East.
Dreams.
Yeah, dreams, visions, things like that.
The question then to this point would be, can those Muslims still have that dream and say no? So the question is whether you're talking about in time or just logically prior. Does salvation have to happen for a person to receive grace? Or I mean, is the grace prior, where does it fall? So Calvin is saying, and Luther said the same thing, spiritually you're a corpse, the corpse can't decide anything, pro or con.
I don't think
So-
that the irresistible grace, I don't think it's quite like that. I always understood it, that the Holy Spirit comes upon somebody and how do I say it? It's not, so it's the changing of the heart to allow them to see the truth, right?
Right.
And so kind of taking a corpse and kind of spiritual corpse and resurrecting them.
But that's salvation.
Um,
In the Calvinist and Lutheran model,
So look
that's
at it as somebody
salvation.
who's maybe blind and takes the blinders off their eyes so that they can see. Now, do they want to go back to the state of blindness? So that's where is it strong or moderate? It's a little gray in there. I mean, certainly
That's a great way.
there's
Calvin's thought
problems
about
if you
it.
say it's strong, but
Exactly.
Peter and Stephen, I mean, they gave the same sermon in all basic effect. Peter and Stephen gave the same sermon, and according to the Bible, the response in the people was the same. They were cut to the heart. One stoned them, one received it. One of them, their eyes were open to what Stephen was saying. They knew the truth, just like, and they, instead of receiving it, they chose to stone him. And
But you're talking about the hearing of the truth, the hearing of the gospel. I think what the
but they were cut,
irresistible grace of that
I
is
think
about.
that whenever it talks about cut to the heart, they knew the
Ah,
truth because they knew that he was talking about them. They both knew
Well, what
that what
the,
he was saying was talking about
what
them.
the Calvinists are going to say is that they didn't really get it. You can't say no to it if you really get the proposition of you're a sinner, the only way out is the cross. Once you actually get that, that's
But if
salvation.
if you can't say no, then it's irresistible
What-
and it's forced.
What's confusing is, what does the Calvin believe? At what point do they believe you get saved?
God's action is
When-
salvation.
No,
when
I
God
think it
reveals
enables
himself
the-
to
So
you?
yeah, they believe
it-
regeneration then salvation.
They
That's-
don't
yes.
bifurcate it. I don't
Okay.
think.
It's pretty, it's
Regeneration right before salvation.
But it's but that's-
Usually, I
it's-
believe salvation
yeah,
then
it's not,
generation.
and it's not resistible. So it's not like God can take the blinder off and say, "Let me tell you the truth," and what do you think? What are you going to do? It's not. Calvinists would say, "No, you absolutely can't do that," because if the blinders have
It's
been
the
put
wooing
on-
of the Spirit, they call it, and the Spirit as it sort of, pulls you into a position where you can now believe, and you will believe as a result of being open to the truth.
and I think that's
And
where
not everybody who hears the gospel is wooed by the Spirit to where they are transformed from a spiritual death to sort of a.
Everybody who hears it.
But that's,
No, I'm
yeah,
saying
yeah.
not everybody who hears the gospel has been approached by the Spirit to be enabled to understand.
Which is the limited atonement aspect
Yes.
of it, that God, if the Spirit chooses not to woo, then there's nothing that
That's correct.
can be done. But of course, then we get into, the Bible says that that person who the Spirit didn't woo, visible attributes of God, his divine attributes, things that are true about God. Romans 2, they're sinners, and they're accountable to that God. They know that they're going to live forever, according to Ecclesiastes. That person who hasn't been moved by God, sounds like they know an awful lot. They're not corpses in that metaphor. I know it's just a metaphor. But, so that's one of the problems I have. But getting back to the all goodness, how can it be that the Spirit decides not to woo if he's omnibenevolent? That's the question we're wrestling with this attribute. If he's all good, he said no to everyone he didn't woo. Everyone he wooed is going to become a Christian. There's no
well, you're setting it up like they're knocking at the door, they're seeking God, and he says no.
No, I'm not going to give him that much credit.
You know what I'm saying?
But
We're talking
They don't seek
Yeah,
out
we're talking
God.
about the difference between coercion and free will. I mean, there is a thing there. Either you're free to choose, or you're coerced.
And the reason that
It's an
they're
either
so,
or. There can't be some middle ground.
the thing that is the
You set
motivator
up a
for,
dilemma there, and I don't think it's a true dilemma.
Okay, well, what's the
but I would
what's
say
the other
uh,
option?
the final thing there is, and this is right in like Oliphant's writings and others, not being willing to face a conclusion of one's position is not the same thing as answering that dilemma. And that's what they do. They just say, I don't know, you guys are misunderstanding our position. Well, explain it. Explain it more. It's like, that's even worse. What do you mean by this then? And right to the point where Oliphant gets all the way to logic is a creation of God. It could have been where there isn't the law of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle in his creation. And that's how God could forcefully coerce people, because he did it before creation. He wasn't violating his law. That's where he has to go to try and actually answer all these what ifs. But in the Bible, this is the interesting thing. Okay, the motivation for Calvinists and Lutherans is that no works are ever going to be enough to get you to heaven. So Catholics were works, do this, and the 7 sacraments, and that's what's going to get you and your loved ones into heaven, out of purgatory, all that. It was really, really bad. So they were responding to something that was evil, was a mischaracterization of the Bible. But then they said that any effort, essentially, by a human is considered works. So that includes having faith. That's a work in their model. No, faith is given to you as a person, and then you're saved. But it's given to you. You can't do it because that would be works. But yet the Bible says it's by grace you have been saved through faith, not of works. And several other places where it says it puts works and faith as these are opposites, guys. So if you have faith, in no sense of the word is that a work, according to Paul's theology explicitly. And I would say that John pretty explicitly too.
He said, quote that verse again.
For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourself, or not of works, depending on the translation. And several other passages, grace versus works. Look at Romans 8, 7.
It's a gift of God, not according to works.
Right.
So it's opposite of
But
works.
faith's not a word.
Yeah, faith is not
But
a
talk
work,
about the
though.
contrast he's making. He's saying, here's works, here's faith. It's through this, not this. So they can't be the same thing.
Right.
Because here's the thing. Faith cannot be a subset of works if Paul is using it as a contrast. And that's what it would have to be. Again, you're logically bound to say faith is a subset of works if you think having faith is a work.
But can it be a gift of God?
It's in the sense of what?
Well, faith is the way the scripture says.
Well, God doles out to each man a measure of faith.
Yeah.
Okay, we all have a measure of faith. It's not about whether we
But it's still
manifest
making
this
the point
faith.
that you're not saved through works, but through.
It's where you put you decide where you're going to put the faith.
Yeah, it's after 5 minutes over. So bring up a good one at the end. And then universalism, that's false. Okay, we're done.